What's up guys, thanks for stopping by. I hope you're doing good. In today's video, I want to talk more about the Ashlands. Usually on this channel, we do either guides or challenge and speedrun content, but considering the main game we cover on this channel is Valheim, when there's a new update, I know lots of you will be curious about my personal opinion about the content, and I know that Iron Gate values the feedback as well. So in this video, I just want to talk about some first impressions and how I'm feeling about the update right now. I will make another video that's more like a review once I've spent more time with the update, where I'll sort of give my final opinion. But for now, I've played a ton of hours of Ashlands in order to keep making content for you guys. And I think I've said enough to give you guys my informed opinion on it. So the first thing I want to talk about, I've got a little bit of a list here that I'm going to work through. And the first thing I want to talk about is the biome itself, the looks, the atmosphere, and sort of the general design of it. I think this has actually become maybe the most polished looking and best looking biome in the game, or at least in terms of as a whole compared to other biomes. And the reason I say that is because the Ashlands isn't just one pit of ash. It sort of has lots of sub-biomes. You've got the spiky rocks in the ocean when you're getting close to it. Then you've got the sort of ashy plains, the smoldering forests, all of the dwarven ruins, the fortresses, the stone arches with sulfur hanging off and stuff. And even though sometimes when you're in the sort of ashy plains type area and sometimes around the fortresses, it can start to look a little bare, for the most part, all of these areas are actually very detailed. And when you add them all together and factor in that this is all inside one biome, one pretty small part of the map, it's actually a ton of detail packed into a small area, which I absolutely love. You know, the Mistlands looks very scenic from a distance, and you can get some really epic cinematic shots, which you'll have seen in my videos. But the thing is, when you get kind of up close to it, lots of the Mistlands starts to feel a little bit messy, a little bit crazy with all of the craggy cliffs. When you're actually up close and personal with the Mistlands, the times it actually feels picturesque and well designed are actually sort of like few and far between, or at least just like very random and dependent on the terrain generation. Whereas in the Ashlands, I feel like you never really go more than a few moments without seeing something that just looks awesome. So love the overall look of it. The last thing I'll say about the biome is the atmosphere, and it actually feels like creepy and scary. You almost get like horror game vibes almost in parts of the Ashlands, which I also love. It really reminds me of like parts of Zelda games that try and get really creepy and just have this like really mysterious atmosphere. And when you view that sort of in the big picture of the sort of progression of the game, because obviously we've still got a while to go to 1.0, but it's one of the last biomes being added. When you think of the progression, going from the meadows and ended up in the Ashlands is a pretty epic adventure when you think of how peaceful the game starts and how it just gets progressively kind of wilder and wilder. So anyway, let's talk about the combat and the mobs. The first thing I was struck by diving into the Ashlands was how crazy aggressive and how different the AI felt there. Overall, the AI is way better. And the reason I'm focusing on AI is because even though I think Valheim is a great game, I think the AI of some of the mobs is one of the weaker parts of the development of the game. And there's just something about the way the mobs look and feel and act and all the animations that just makes them feel a lot more alive in the Ashlands than in other biomes. And I love that. They're also very, very aggressive. Some of this stuff may change because the AI changed quite a bit from the public test build with the Mistlands, so we'll see if it changes when the Ashlands comes to the live branch. But overall, the AI feels like an improvement. Also, there's so much variety of mobs. There's so many different types of charred. Then you've got the new blobs, then you've got the vultures, then you've got the Valkyries, then you've got the Morgans, then you've got the Aspen. It just feels like there's so much more going on when it comes to mobs in the Ashlands, which is great. The one thing I'm really loving about the combat recently is when I first went into the Ashlands, I started sort of playing it how I always play Valheim, just like running around with melee weapons and just blocking and parrying, and that's doable. But at a certain point, it's really easy to get totally overwhelmed if you're just running in up and close and personal to enemies in Valheim in general, but in the Ashlands in particular. And one of my favorite weapons is actually the ice staff from the Mistlands. So I decided to test that out. And this has provided me with some of the most satisfying Valheim gameplay I've had so far. Just taking it slow and picking off one enemy at a time with magic is so satisfying. And using the ice staff for crowd control and just melting enemies before they get close to you feels so good. And not only that, but even though magic has always been good if you're willing to invest the time and upgrade the skills for it, I feel like it gets sort of slept on because previously it was sort of a lot of mats and time that needed to be invested in it for something that you only got towards the end of the game previously. And by the time you get to the Mistlands, you're already so overpowered for the rest of the game anyway. I feel like it just becomes something that not a lot of people use unless they're just passionate about it. But what's cool about now having another biome after the Mistlands that's actually a bit more difficult is that there's now a reason to invest in magic. And I have found the ice staff to be one of the most effective weapons in the biome. We'll make a video about that probably at some point in the future. But for the sake of this video, my point was just that it feels like the Ashlands is actually rewarding like different styles of gameplay compared to other biomes. I feel like when everyone starts playing Valheim, it's all about the ranged meta and just using bow and arrows for a lot of people. Then when they get better at the game, everyone just starts to parry and it becomes more about melee. And then that skill set kind of transfers to everywhere. You just upgrade your melee weapons, upgrade your shield, and you just stop parrying and attacking. But whilst that's still valuable in the Ashlands, magic also has a lot of value here as well, just by the fact that it's easy to get really overwhelmed and you're gonna want to keep picking off mobs. And magic is a really good way to do that without having to craft a bunch of arrows. And of course, with the ice staff, it's also a way to use ranged attacks with a really high rate of fire in a way that actually has a slow effect as well. So the combat with the new gear, which is what I'm going to talk about next, is also really good. Also really enjoying that there's a lot more high DPS gear now with all of the dual wield weapons. Love the Berserker Primal Axes in particular. They actually have a chance to immobilize an enemy like all of the green weapon variants do. But the thing is, it's basically a 20% chance per hit. So if you do that with a high DPS option, you're actually going to have more of a chance of causing the enemy to get immobilized, which makes the Berserker Axes really good if you're interested in that effect. And I am. And what I like about that in particular is that that now promotes this high DPS sort of roguish style gameplay, which has always been a thing in Valheim. There's a whole part of the community that just loves using troll armor or Fenris armor and knives because of the increased movement speed, and they just want to be really fast. I'm one of those players. I love that. And that playstyle has been massively expanded. So if you combine the fact that the new weapon arsenal expands high DPS gameplay, it also expands magic gameplay, but also the new content makes a previous magic content more useful. Overall, the amount of viable ways to play Valheim and different play styles have never been more viable. And not just viable, but also super valuable as well. Like a lot of the ways people choose to play Valheim is based on personal preference, which is great, but it's really just an indication of how easy some of the other areas were and how effective so many weapons were. I do feel like with the Ashlands, it forces you to get a little bit more meta. And whilst lots of playstyles are really valuable, having fast movement speed to get out of danger quickly when getting overwhelmed and being able to have magic to crowd control sort of infinitely, it just feels like all these playstyles have never been more viable, and I absolutely love that. The new gear in general is really good. The new capes are amazing. All of the new weapons are absolutely amazing. Love the fact that we've got weapon variants now with the gems and stuff. I haven't talked enough about the new magic. The new magic is so cool and so epic. Regardless of how meta it feels, I do feel like the ice staff might be a little bit more effective in the Ashlands specifically than some of this new stuff, but as far as the rest of the game, it feels so good. All the new magic stuff is awesome. So difficulty. I'll say that when I first went into the Ashlands, it did feel more difficult at first. It felt like the most aggressive biome ever. It just felt like you're immediately getting pounced on by lots of enemies. But after spending a little bit more time with it, I've kind of realized that going in slow and sort of like choosing to come ashore where you don't see any enemies and sort of gradually just picking off enemies one at a time and just going really slow in general does make it a lot easier. So previously, like with the Mistlands, for example, there was a period of time where it felt like the enemies were a little bit overpowered and they ended up getting nerfed. And so it wasn't really very well balanced at first. And perhaps there's still some balancing that could be done. But the Ashlands actually feels more balanced than the Mistlands update. It feels like it's had more time in the oven. Feels like Iron Gate have put a lot of effort into the balancing of it. And so the difficulty is good, it's increased, but the way I would describe it is it just feels like it's got a higher risk reward factor. It's not necessarily that fighting each enemy individually is way harder than before, because it actually isn't, particularly if you make sure you are using fully upgraded versions of that Mistlands gear. That's actually a key factor too. We'll talk about that in future videos, I think. But yeah, it feels like individually enemies aren't that much harder, but it's more about the fact that if you're not careful and you don't just take it easy and gradually pick enemies off, if you start to walk into larger groups and attract a lot of attention, you can get overwhelmed so quickly, absolutely super rapidly. It's essentially just like jumping into the middle of a fueling camp. And if you factor in Valkyries and stuff as well, like if there's a Valkyrie around and you've got other mobs on your stuff, it can get real crazy real quick and things get seriously out of hand. So the difficulty is actually more balanced while still being more challenging. But the way it's done is actually great because it's doable if you take your time and you plan things out, and it's much higher risk reward. There's epic loot in the Ashlands, but if you get careless, it's going to become nigh on impossible once you get overwhelmed. And I think that is actually very cool. The new build pieces, I'm not really a builder. I love building in general. It is cool, but I don't make build content. But I'll just say that I think they look cool. I actually weirdly get almost like Dune vibes or something. It feels like very science fiction, which I like the look of that. Maybe steampunk-esque. The new mini boss, very cool. By far the most interesting mini boss and most challenging mini boss, although we will have some sort of content where I describe that. Maybe we'll just put it in the guide when I finally get around to making the ultimate Ashlands guide. But that effect I mentioned with those primal berserker axes, actually very good against that mini boss. I don't want to spoil too much about that, but yeah, the mini boss is good. Much like the rest of the Ashlands, it seems maybe kind of crazy at first. It has a lot of HP, but with the right gear choice and the right plan, very doable. The new boss, I don't want to spoil too much about the new boss. I've not spent enough time beating the new boss, although I have beaten it for the purposes of other videos, but I just want to do it several times before I really formulate a more finalized opinion. Again, this is just like a sort of first impressions video, but what I will say, it looks so cool. I love the music and the soundtrack for the boss. The music for the rest of the update is also cool, and yeah, the fight itself seems good. I don't know, I've not done it enough times to really have a strong opinion about the boss other than just aesthetic stuff. It sounds and looks cool. I do love the fact that you actually have to make multiple bells and place them around the edge of the arena and then ring them to summon him. And the fact that he shoots down from the sky, all of that stuff is so cool. It really makes doing this boss feel like a really long Zelda quest, which I think is great. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that was on my list. The last few things I've got on the list is just like my views in general and also any negatives. So in general, right now, I will say Ashlands seems like an excellent update with a super high level of polish, even more polished than the Mistlands. The Mistlands, I felt like, was one of the best updates that happened for free to any game ever. However, it did also have some negatives. I don't like the mist. I think it's a shit mechanic. Taking vision away from players, I feel like historically has never been a good design idea in video games. It looks nice and it is kind of cool to watch it get cleared, but in general it's just annoying and frustrating. I think not being able to see much in that biome. The rest of the Mistlands I really like. The boss was epic, etc. But anyway, with the Ashlands in general, I think there's just way less negatives you could even say about it. It seems a lot better thought out, a lot more fun. And yeah, in general, another great addition to the game. Yeah, as far as any negatives, there is nothing major. Like I said, I still have some major issues with the Mistlands when it comes to the fundamental stuff of having to jump around so much, the horrible terrain and the mist. Even though, you know, everything else about that biome is still cool. I like the aesthetic and the vibe. I just think it's annoying to traverse and you can't see, which is never fun. But yeah, I have nothing really to say like that about the Ashlands. If I was really to try and nitpick, I would say the way the boiling mechanics work are actually a little bit confusing. Actually caused me to say the wrong thing in my previous video about the Ashlands. You do boil by being in the water, but there's lots of conflicting info, and I've done a lot of research and testing on this now. And how it actually works is you boil faster the further south you are. So if you're on the very edge of the map to the south, like literally where you fall off the edge, you boil almost instantly. And you can survive almost a couple of minutes if you're on the northernmost border of the Ashlands before boiling even kicks in. So depending on where you're at, it might appear that there's no boiling effect, or it might appear that it's instant. And I've seen people say that, oh, the boiling effect is instant, or it only happens by the coast, or blah, blah, blah. None of this is true. It's just based on how far south you get. That I do actually like once you figure it out, but I think that's a bit confusing perhaps. But it doesn't really matter because it's a minor feature in the update. The really cool sword, the Dernwin, whilst being really cool and good, is quite a lot of effort to make. And I do feel like maybe the reward doesn't quite feel worth it in terms of it's worth getting just for how cool it is. But I think maybe it could do to be a little bit more powerful to actually feel like it's worth it. But that's also a problem for other areas of the game. Like no mini boss is really worth it. It's just like another fun thing to do. The payoff for these mini bosses is still not great. The payoff for this mini boss is a million times better than the payoff for doing the Hilda's Request ones, because it's more than just clothes. The adventure is its own reward, don't get me wrong. I'm not hating. I think it's good content, but yeah, we're nitpicking here. So yeah, the reward is better than the other mini bosses, but I think it still could be better still. And the fortresses, while super cool and provide a new mechanic, are a little bit underwhelming. Not because of they're bad or anything, but more so that they seem to be replacing an actual new underground dungeon. We do have new caves, which are very cool, but it does sort of feel like there are no dungeons in the Ashlands because they're replaced by these fortresses, and the fortresses ultimately are just very small. They are very cool, very fun. They provide a lot of chaos, awesome new mechanic with the battering ram, but it does feel like there's a lack of dungeon content in the Ashlands, which would have been nice to see. But anyway, those are the very minor things. I love the update. I think Iron Gate are doing a great job. Real quick at the end, my favorites are just making magic more viable, making high DPS more viable. Berserker axes are epic. The new capes are epic. And yeah, that's pretty much how I feel about this update. I want to stress these aren't like my final reviews. These aren't my final feelings. This is my first impressions, having spent multiple hours making videos about the update so far, but I just wanted to let you guys know how I was feeling. I will give another update in a video like this again after I spent more time with it, and I also will be making more guides, and there will be one big guide like I did the Massive Mistlands guide. I'll be doing the same thing, the Ashlands. That will come out once the update is on live servers, and I'm not going to rush that out. It will be very well researched and hopefully contain the best information, and I've already started gathering lots and lots of info and strats for you guys that hopefully will be good information when the time comes. All right guys, that's just about gonna do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for future content. Leave a comment for the YouTube algorithm. You can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/NickRawcliffe if you want to watch some live streams. I do stream on this channel as well, so leave a link in the description to my Twitch if you're interested in that. You can also support the content financially on Patreon at patreon.com/NickRawcliffe, so there'll be a link in the description to that as well. You can follow me on social media and join my Discord at the links below. And until next time, have a good one.